In the heart of Kijumbe, a vibrant African village where the baobab trees stood tall and the river sang through the land, a joyous celebration filled the air. The villagers gathered in colourful garments, dancing to the rhythm of the talking drums, their voices rising like birds in song. It was a day of great happiness. Omari had taken a wife, and her name was Lusala. She stood beside her husband, wrapped in a dazzling kiteng, her wrists adorned with jingling beads. Her beauty was not just in her face but in the way she carried herself, with grace, strength, and humility. Lusala was known throughout Kijumbe for her hard-working nature, a woman who never turned away from duty, who met every challenge with steady hands. Omari had chosen her not for riches, not for status, but for the love that burned between them, deep and true. The villagers cheered, the elders blessed their union, and the children danced freely, but among them, one pair of eyes held no joy. Mwanza, Omari's mother, sat stiffly, clapping only when necessary, her face betraying the storm in her heart. This was not the daughter-in-law she had wished for. She had imagined a different woman for her son, one from a wealthier family, one she could shape, one who would bow to her word without question. But Lusala was not that woman. She carried herself with quiet confidence, a strength that unsettled Mwanza. As the celebration roared on, Mwanza barely touched her food. Instead, she studied Lusala, watching her every move, her every smile. Resentment festered in her heart, her mind already spinning a web of plans. The villagers saw a wedding of love, a beginning of happiness, but Mwanza saw something else. She saw a battle, and in her mind, she had already decided Lusala would not win. The morning sun rose over Kijumbe, bathing the village in golden light. Life moved as it always did. Women pounded maize, children ran barefoot through the dusty paths, and men prepared for the day's work. In the small home where Omari and Lusala lived, love had blossomed in the first weeks of their marriage. Lusala woke early to prepare food, swept their yard until it was spotless, and greeted her husband each evening with a warm smile. To anyone who looked, they were a happy couple. But beneath this peaceful surface, a storm was brewing, one stirred by Mwanza. Mwanza had waited patiently, watching and listening, waiting for the perfect moment to plant the first seed of doubt in Omari's heart. She did not attack Lusala outright. No, she was too clever for that. Instead, she let her poison drip slowly, word by word, like a steady rain that erodes even the strongest rock. One evening, as Omari sat in the courtyard, sharpening his machete, his mother settled beside him with a heavy sigh. "My son," she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I have lived many years, and these old eyes have seen much. A woman's true nature is not always what it seems." Omari looked up, confused. "What are you saying, mother?" She shook her head, as if she were reluctant to speak. "It is not my place to interfere in your marriage. But my son, have you noticed how Lusala wakes later these days? A good wife should rise before her husband, prepare his water, his food, but I see you leaving in the morning without breakfast. I see you returning home to a woman who does not welcome you at the gate." She clicked her tongue. "I only speak because I love you." Omari frowned. It wasn't true. Lusala always woke early, always prepared his meals. But his mother's words planted a tiny seed of doubt, one so small he barely noticed it. Days passed, and Mwanza continued her whispers. She made sure Omari overheard her speaking to the neighbors. "Ah, in my days, a wife knew how to respect her husband, but times have changed. Some women, they smile in front of you but carry secrets behind your back." She would sigh heavily, shaking her head as if she carried a great burden. "I pray for my son, but what can a mother do?" The whispers worked. Omari found himself watching Lusala more closely. Was she truly as hard-working as he had believed? Had he been blinded by love? Doubts crept into his mind like shadows at dusk. Then Mwanza took her lies further. One evening, as Lusala prepared their evening meal, Mwanza sat beside Omari, her face grave. "My son," she whispered, "I must tell you something, though it pains me. There is a man, a stranger who lingers near our home. I have seen him more than once, watching, waiting, and today I saw him speak to Lusala." Omari's heart pounded. "That cannot be true," he said, but his voice wavered. Mwanza touched his hand gently. I pray that I am wrong, but my son, open your eyes. A woman who cannot be trusted brings misfortune to her husband. That night, Omari lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He tried to dismiss his mother's words, but doubt wrapped around him like vines. The next morning, when Lusala smiled at him, he hesitated before returning her smile. And Mwanza, she watched from the shadows, a satisfied smile tugging at her lips. The first crack had appeared. Soon it would shatter. The village of Kajumbe was no longer the happy place Lusala had known. Something had changed in her home. Omari, her loving husband, was no longer the same. His eyes no longer held warmth when he looked at her. His voice was no longer soft when he spoke. He was slipping away, and Lusala didn't know why. But Mwanza knew, because she was the one making it happen. She worked in silence, making sure her tricks could not be traced back to her. Early in the morning, when Lusala woke up to cook breakfast, Mwanza waited for the right moment. As soon as Lusala stepped outside to fetch water, Mwanza hurried to the fire, adding too much wood and making the food burn. The smell of smoke filled the air. When Lusala returned, she gasped. "What happened?" she whispered, staring at the blackened food. Just then, Omari stepped in. He wrinkled his nose at the burnt smell. His eyes narrowed. "Lusala, how could you be so careless?" he asked. Before Lusala could explain, Mwanza sighed loudly. "Ah, my son, a wife who cannot even cook a simple meal. What kind of woman is this?" she said, shaking her head. "But what can we do? You chose her." Omari didn't say anything, but he did not eat that morning. As the days passed, Mwanza continued her silent tricks. One afternoon, when Lusala was visiting a neighbor, Mwanza sneaked into her hut and took a pair of gold earrings that Omari had given Lusala after their wedding. That night, when Lusala looked for them, she couldn't find them anywhere. "Where are my earrings?" Lusala asked, searching every corner. Mwanza stood at the door, her arms crossed. "A careless woman loses things," she said with a smirk. Then her voice became softer, more dangerous. "Or maybe she gives them away." Omari, who was sitting nearby, looked up sharply. His face darkened. "What are you saying, mother?" Mwanza shrugged. "I only speak what my heart wonders." Then she whispered, just loud enough for Omari to hear. "A careless wife loses her husband's gifts. A dishonest wife gives them to another man." That night, Omari could not sleep. Lusala lay beside him, but his heart felt far away. A small voice in his head told him his mother was wrong, but doubt had already found a place in his heart. Then came the day of the storm. Dark clouds covered Kijumbe, and strong winds howled through the village. It was a bad day. In the afternoon, Omari's best goat escaped from its pen. It ran toward the rocky path near the river, slipped, and fell. When the villagers found it, it was already dead. People shook their heads in pity. "Such bad luck," they whispered. But Mwanza only smiled. That night, as they sat by the fire, she spoke again. "That goat was strong," she said, poking the fire with a stick. "But since Lusala came into this house, strange things have been happening. Burnt food, lost jewelry, and now this." She sighed heavily. Maybe she brought bad luck with her." Omari clenched his jaw. "Enough, mother." But Mwanza only shook her head. "I say no more, my son. I only hope you are watching." And Omari did watch. He noticed. He doubted. Slowly, Lusala felt her world falling apart. No matter how hard she tried, Omari was slipping away. And Mwanza, the one who caused it all, sat in the shadows, smiling. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth as Lusala walked along the quiet path leading to the river. Her steps were slow, her thoughts heavy. The once warm and loving home she had built with Omari had become a place of coldness and doubt. No matter how hard she tried, she could feel him slipping away, his heart poisoned by whispers she could not fight. Mwanza, his mother, had woven her lies so carefully that even Omari, the man who had once sworn to cherish her, now looked at her with suspicion instead of love. Reaching the riverbank, Lusala knelt beside the water, staring at her reflection. The moon's soft glow illuminated her tired face, eyes filled with unspoken sorrow. She had always been strong, resilient, but now she felt powerless. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being blamed for everything. How could she defend herself against something she could not see? You look at your reflection, yet you do not see the truth. Startled, Lusala turned to find an elderly woman standing a few feet away, draped in a simple cloth, her back slightly hunched with age. She leaned on a wooden staff. Though her face was lined with years of wisdom, her eyes were sharp, piercing through the darkness with an intensity that made Lusala shiver. "Mother Bakira," Lusala murmured, recognizing the respected herbalist of the village. Bakira studied her for a long moment before nodding toward the water. "What do you see, child?" "Myself," Lusala replied hesitantly. "No," Bakira said, shaking her head. "You see only what others have made you believe, but the truth lies deeper." Tears threatened to spill from Lusala's eyes. "I do not know what to do," she admitted. "My husband has changed. His mother fills his heart with doubt, and I am powerless against her. No matter how much I try, I am losing him." The old woman reached into a small pouch at her waist and pulled out a dried leaf. She crumbled it between her fingers, letting the fragments scatter into the night breeze. "There is a snake in your home," Bakira said, her voice calm yet firm. "A snake that moves in silence, spreading its poison unseen." A chill ran through Lusala. She did not need to ask who Bakira meant. "The snake is cunning," Bakira continued, "but even the most cunning of creatures cannot escape its own venom." Lusala's heart pounded. "What should I do?" she asked, desperation lacing her voice. Bakira studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Do not fight the wind, child. Let it pass. Let karma do what it must." Confusion flickered across Lusala's face. "I don't understand. The one who digs a pit for another will one day fall into it," Bakira interrupted gently. "The truth has a way of revealing itself. Be patient. Watch. And when the time comes, you will understand." Before Lusala could respond, Bakira turned and walked away, vanishing into the darkness like a shadow. For a long time, Lusala remained by the river, her mind spinning with the herbalist's words. Bakira had not told her to fight back. She had not told her to defend herself or seek revenge. She had only told her to wait. And so, that night, Lusala made a decision. She would wait. She would endure, because no lie could stay hidden forever. The afternoon sun burned hot over Kijumbe, casting long shadows across the village. Inside the small home, Lusala sat quietly, stitching a torn cloth, unaware that her entire world was about to shatter. The past few months had been difficult. Omari had grown distant, his warmth replaced by cold suspicion. No matter what she did, he always seemed to find fault in her. She had tried to hold on, to remind him of the love they once shared, but it felt like grasping at smoke. Outside, Mwanza watched her through the narrow opening in the door, her lips curling into a sly smile. Everything was falling into place. She'd spent months poisoning her son's mind, but now she needed one final blow to rid Lusala from his life forever. She had arranged everything carefully, making sure the trap was set. That evening, as the villagers gathered in the marketplace, a man named Bashiri stepped forward. He was a known trickster, someone who could be bought for the right price. His voice trembled just enough to make his lie believable. "I have held this secret for too long," he began, his eyes flickering toward Mwanza, who stood at the edge of the crowd, her face a mask of false concern. "But I cannot live with this guilt anymore. I must confess, I have been with Lusala in secret." Gasps filled the air. All eyes turned toward Omari, whose face had gone pale with shock. His jaw tightened as Bashiri continued. "She begged me not to say anything," Bashiri went on, shaking his head. "But I cannot lie anymore. Lusala has been unfaithful." The weight of the accusation hit Omari like a hammer. His mother's warnings, the doubts that had been growing in his mind, all of it suddenly made sense to him. His hands curled into fists, rage bubbling inside him. Without a word, he turned and stormed home. Inside, Lusala looked up as Omari burst through the door, his face twisted with fury. "You have betrayed me," he thundered, his voice shaking the walls. Confusion flashed across Lusala's face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, rising to her feet. "Don't pretend," Omari shouted. "A man stood before the whole village today and confessed everything. You have been unfaithful to me, Lusala. You have shamed me in front of everyone." Shock paralyzed Lusala for a moment. Then, realization dawned. This was Mwanza's doing. The missing jewelry, the burnt food, The whispers in Omari's ear, it had all been leading to this. "Omari, listen to me," she pleaded. "This is a lie. You know me. You know my heart." But Omari was too blinded by rage to hear her. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her toward the door. "Get out!" he spat. "You are no longer my wife." At that moment, Mwanza stepped forward, shaking her head with fake sorrow. "Oh, my son," she murmured, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I warned you about her, but you refused to listen." Tears streamed down Lusala's face as she turned to Omari, searching for any trace of the man she had loved. But he had already made up his mind. With nothing but the clothes on her back, Lusala stepped out into the night, leaving behind the home she had fought so hard to build. As she walked away, she did not look back. Deep inside, she knew the truth would one day come to light. But for now, she had lost everything. The road was long, stretching endlessly before Lusala. As she walked away from the only home she had ever known, her heart ached with every step, but she did not stop. She had no choice but to move forward. Omari had thrown her out, believing the lies his mother had planted. There was nothing left for her in Kijumbe. She had lost her husband, her home, and the life she had built. But she still had herself. As the sun began to set, she reached the neighboring village of Mugano. It was a quiet place, filled with people who did not know her story. She had no family there, no friends, but she had her hands, her skills, and a heart full of determination. The first few weeks were the hardest. Lusala had nothing but the clothes on her back. She slept under a tree at the edge of the village, using leaves and her shawl to keep warm at night. During the day, she walked through the village, looking for work. Some people turned her away, suspicious of a stranger with no home. Others pitied her but had nothing to offer. One day, she met an elderly woman named Misha, who sold handmade baskets in the market. Seeing Lusala's tired face, she took pity on her and gave her a small job, gathering reeds from the river to weave baskets. It was not much, but it was something. Slowly, Lusala began to rebuild her life. She learned to weave baskets, watching Misha's skilled hands turn simple reeds into beautiful patterns. She listened carefully, practicing late into the night under the moonlight. Within weeks, her hands had become just as skilled, and she was able to make her own baskets. With the little money she earned, she bought food and a few pieces of cloth. She no longer had to sleep under the tree. A kind widow in the village let her sleep in her small hut in exchange for help with chores. Lusala cleaned, cooked, and helped care for the widow's goats. Word spread about the young woman who worked tirelessly without complaint. People in Mugano began to notice her. A farmer offered her leftover vegetables at a lower price. A tailor gave her an old dress that no one had bought. Little by little, she was no longer a stranger. She was one of them. One day, as Lusala sat in the market selling her baskets, a wealthy merchant named Baraka stopped at her stall. He picked up one of her baskets, admiring the fine weaving. "These are beautiful," he said. "Did you make them?" "Yes," Lusala replied softly. Baraka nodded. "I traveled to many villages, selling goods. I could take your baskets with me and sell them in other places. We can split the earnings." It was an opportunity Lusala never expected. With a grateful heart, she agreed. From that day on, her baskets were sold in many villages, and her earnings grew. She bought her own small hut, no longer needing charity. Months passed, and Lusala became one of the most respected women in Mugano. She was no longer the broken woman who'd arrived with nothing. She was independent, successful, and admired by many. But no matter how much she prospered, she never forgot the pain of her past. Omari's betrayal still lingered in her heart, but she no longer wept for him. She had found her strength, and she had built a new life, one that no one could take from her. Back in Kijumbe, life was not going well for Omari. Since he had thrown Lusala out of the house, everything seemed to go wrong. The once thriving farm he had worked so hard to build began to crumble. The crops that had always flourished in his fields started to wither. The strong, healthy cattle that once roamed his land became sick and died one by one. No matter what he tried, nothing seemed to work. His family's business, which had once been the heart of the village, began to fail. No one wanted to buy from him anymore. People whispered that his farm and business were cursed. Omari couldn't understand what was happening. Everything he touched turned to dust. His anger grew, and his sadness deepened. He couldn't figure out why he had been so successful for years. But now nothing was going right. He worked harder than ever, but it was all in vain. Meanwhile, Mwanza, who had always been so sure of herself, began to show signs of weakness. At first, she simply complained about feeling tired. But then, the exhaustion grew worse. She couldn't get out of bed, and her body seemed to betray her. She became pale, weak, and frail, unable to move around like she used to. The villagers who had once respected her began to talk. They remembered how she had caused so much trouble for Lusala, how she had planted lies in Omari's mind, and how she had made sure her son threw his wife out of the house. Now, it seemed like Mwanza was paying the price for her cruel actions. People whispered that she was cursed, that her bad deeds had finally caught up with her. Omari was desperate. He still couldn't understand why everything was going wrong. He had tried everything. He had worked harder, prayed for help, and asked the village elders for advice, but nothing worked. His heart became heavy with guilt, and his anger turned inward. He couldn't shake the thought that perhaps Lusala had been right all along. Days turned into weeks, and Mwanza's illness only grew worse. She was no longer the strong, proud woman who had controlled everything. Now, she was weak and helpless. Her skin grew cold, and her eyes had a dull, lifeless look. She could barely speak, and when she did, it was with great difficulty. It was as though something inside her had broken, and there was no way to fix it. The whispers in the village grew louder. The people who had once been afraid of Mwanza began to avoid her. They spoke of how she had ruined Lusala's life, how she had tricked Omari into casting out his loving wife. The villagers believed that karma had come for her, and it had come with a vengeance. Omari could no longer deny it. He began to remember the good woman Lusala had been, the kind woman who always worked hard, who loved him, and who never once betrayed him. He realized that he had been blinded by his mother's lies, that he had allowed his heart to be poisoned by her words. Now, as he watched his life crumble before him, he understood that it was not just bad luck, it was karma. He felt guilty for not listening to Lusala. He wished he could turn back time to undo the harm he had done, but it was too late. Mwanza was too sick, and the damage had already been done. The villagers now avoided Omari as well, seeing him as part of the curse. They no longer saw him as the successful farmer they had once admired. Instead, they saw him as a man who had allowed his mother's greed and hatred to destroy his own happiness. The once proud house that Omari and Mwanza had lived in stood empty, a symbol of their downfall. It was clear to everyone in the village that karma had come for them, and it had come hard. Omari was left with nothing but regret, and Mwanza lay in her bed, unable to move, unable to escape the consequences of her cruel actions. The village watched as the once powerful family fell apart. The winds of change had blown through Kijumbe, and no one could escape the power of karma. The village of Kijumbe had been buzzing with whispers for days, but tonight the truth would finally surface. Bashiri, the drunkard who had once helped spread lies about Lusala, staggered into the village square. His movements were unsteady, his words slurred as he tried to get the attention of the villagers. Normally, no one would take him seriously, but tonight something was different. There was a weight in his words that caught everyone's attention. "I have to tell you something," he said, his voice shaky but insistent. I lied about Lusala. Everything I said was a lie." The crowd, mostly made up of villagers who had heard rumors about Lusala but never dared question the story, paused. They looked at Bashiri, confused, but he was determined. "I was paid," he continued, his eyes flickering with guilt. "I was paid by Mwanza, Omari's mother. She told me to say that Lusala had a secret lover. She told me to ruin her name, and I did it." The villagers gasped. This was not what they had expected to hear. For years, they had watched Omari struggle, believing that his wife, Lusala, was the source of his misfortune. But now, it all began to make sense. The pieces fell into place. Bashiri staggered forward, his voice barely audible as he confessed the full extent of the deception. "She gave me money, And others too. She paid me to spread lies. I never should have done it, but now I can't keep quiet anymore. His confession hit like a storm. The truth that had been buried for so long was now out in the open. Mwanza had manipulated her son, Omari, and everyone around her. She had poisoned minds with lies, causing destruction without any remorse. The villagers were in shock. No one knew how to react. For so long, they had believed in the stories Mwanza had told them, trusting her word as gospel. But now, they could see that everything she had said about Lusala was a lie. Word of Bashiri's confession spread quickly, and before long, the village elders called for a meeting. They needed to speak with him, for they knew that this revelation would change everything. When Omari arrived, he found the elders, their faces grey, full of sorrow. They wasted no time in explaining the truth. Your mother deceived. Tito, the oldest elder, said quietly. The man you trusted, the woman you loved. Mwanza set it all in motion. She paid others to lie about Lusala, and she poisoned your mind with false accusation. Omari was stunned. His mind raced, but all he could do was stand there, frozen. The image of his mother, who he had always trusted, was now shattered. The guilt began to eat away at him. He had turned against the one woman who had loved him unconditionally, the woman who had never betrayed him, and it was all because of a lie. Lusala was never unfaithful, the elder continued, and whatever misfortune you faced, it was not because of her. It was because of your mother's deceit. The curse that has befallen you, that is her doing. For the first time in a long while, Omari felt a pang of regret so deep it shook him to his core. His world, which had already been crumbling, now seemed to collapse entirely. Everything he had known was built on a foundation of lies. The truth had been in front of him all along, but he had been too blind to see it. Now, Mwanza's manipulation and the damage she had caused were clear to everyone. Omari couldn't undo the harm, and the damage had already been done. His crops had failed, his cattle had died, and his business had fallen apart. And worst of all, Lusala, the woman he had wronged, was gone. In that moment, Omari realized that his life had been destroyed not by Lusala, but by the very person who had promised to protect him, his own mother. It was too late to undo the damage. The village knew the truth, and the weight of that truth hung heavily on Omari's heart. There was no turning back. Lusala was gone, and Mwanza, in her deception, had ensured that Omari would never be able to find peace. The truth had come out, but for Omari, it was a bitter revelation. Too late to save what he had lost. Omari's heart was heavy as he walked through the dusty paths of the village. The weight of his regret crushed him with every step. He had betrayed Lusala, and now that he knew the truth, nothing seemed right. He had believed his mother's lies, and, in doing so, had destroyed the life of the woman he once loved. Now, with everything lost, Omari knew that the only thing left for him to do was seek her forgiveness. He travelled to the neighbouring village, where Lusala had built a new life. The journey was long, and with every mile he thought about how he could make things right. His crops had failed, his cattle had died, and everything his family had once cherished had crumbled. But none of that mattered now. His mind was focused solely on Lusala and the hope that she might still find it in her heart to forgive him. When Omari finally reached the small village, he asked around, hoping to find someone who could guide him to Lusala. The villagers spoke of her with admiration, describing her as strong, independent, and prosperous. She had built a business, earned respect, and was thriving in ways that Omari could hardly imagine. As he walked toward her house, he saw the changes in Lusala. The woman he had once known, who had seemed fragile under the weight of his betrayal, was now standing tall, confident, and at peace with herself. He knocked at the door, his heart pounding in his chest. When Lusala opened it, she looked at him with a mixture of surprise and wariness. She had not expected to see him again, not after the way he had cast her aside, believing his mother's lies. "Omari," she said quietly, her voice steady, but there was no warmth in it. "What are you doing here?" He dropped to his knees in front of her, tears welling in his eyes. "I've made a terrible mistake, Lusala. I believed my mother's lies. I turned my back on you, and I ruined everything. Please forgive me. I can't live with myself knowing that I destroyed our love because of false accusations." Lusala stood there for a moment, silent. She had spent so much time healing from the pain he had caused her, rebuilding her life. Her heart had been broken, but in that process, she had found strength. She had learned to stand on her own, to be independent, and to embrace the woman she had become. But now, here was Omari, begging for forgiveness, desperate to undo the past. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Omari," she said softly. "You broke my heart. You didn't believe in me when I needed you the most. You listened to your mother's lies, and you cast me aside. It hurt more than I can say." Omari's face crumpled with regret. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I wasn't strong enough to see through the lies. But I swear to you, I've learned my lesson. I've lost everything, and the only thing left is you. Please, come back. Let me make things right." For a long moment, Lusala said nothing. She thought of the pain, the betrayal, and the years she had spent rebuilding herself. She had learned that she could stand alone, that she didn't need Omari to define her. She was now strong, independent, and in control of her own life. And for a brief moment, she thought about returning to the life she had once shared with him, to forgive him and try to rebuild what was broken. But she couldn't forget the lessons she had learned. She was no longer the same woman who had been crushed by his abandonment. She was someone new, someone stronger. "You're right," she said, her voice now filled with a quiet strength. "I could have returned to you, but I won't. I've grown, Omari. I'm not the same woman you threw out. I am in control of my life now. I've found peace, and I won't give that up. I've learned that I can live without you, and I am better for it." Tears filled Omari's eyes. He had lost the love of his life, but he knew that he had learned a valuable lesson. He had searched for forgiveness, but the person he needed to make amends with most was himself. As Lusala closed the door, he realized that he had truly lost her, not just because of his mistakes, but because she had found the strength to walk away and build a life without him. And that, more than anything, was his greatest lesson. You cannot undo the past, and sometimes the person who is most important to forgive is yourself. Mwanza was no longer the strong woman she once was. Her health had fallen apart, and she was now weak and bedridden. She could feel the consequences of her actions catching up with her. The villagers whispered about how Mwanza had been cursed, and they all saw how her life had crumbled because of the lies she told. Realizing her mistakes, Mwanza asked for Lusala to come to her. She was filled with regret, knowing she had caused so much harm. She begged Lusala for forgiveness, hoping she could find some mercy. "Please forgive me, Lusala," she said softly, tears in her eyes. "I was wrong. I see what I've done, and I am so sorry. Please forgive me." Lusala stood at the door, looking at the woman who had caused her so much pain. She had become strong and independent, and now she knew that forgiveness wasn't always the answer. Mwanza had hurt her deeply, and it wasn't her place to erase those wrongs. "I won't curse you, Mwanza," Lusala replied calmly. "Life has already judged you. You did this to yourself." Hearing those words, Mwanza knew it was true. There was nothing she could do to undo the damage she'd caused. Lusala walked away, leaving her behind to face the consequences of her action. Karma had come for Mwanza, and it was too late for her to change. Thank you for watching. If this story taught you something valuable, like the power of karma and the strength in moving forward, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let's spread these lessons together. Your support helps us bring more stories with meaning.